Bon après-midi à tous. Alors, je me présente, Pierre-Luc Bisaillon, et je vais, dans quelques instants, vous présenter l'excellent panel qu'on a assemblé pour vous parler des enjeux, justement, de l'intelligence artificielle. I'll say a few words in French, and then we'll switch for the main panel in English. Premièrement, je voulais vous souhaiter la bienvenue au nom de Garde World, qui est un des commanditaires de la conférence de Montréal. Très heureux d'être ici. Garde World, qui est un grand succès de Montréal, peut-être même un peu méconnu, qui est en opération aujourd'hui dans 46 pays. On a plus de 132 000 employés. Vraiment une belle histoire d'un succès d'ici, qui a été même réévalué lors d'une récente transaction financière à une valeur plus de 14 milliards de dollars canadiens. Donc, on est très fiers du succès, très fiers d'être ici. So really happy to be here on behalf of Garda World, one of the sponsors of the Conférence de Montréal. Garda World is perhaps, I think, sort of secret success in Montreal, despite the size of the success we've had, now operating in 46 countries with 132,000 employees worldwide. Very happy with the financial success we've recently announced with a very large sort of private equity transaction or privatization and management buyout valued at $14 billion Canadian. So very happy with the success story. And I've joined less than a year ago in the leading technology role here in Montreal. And it's been very exciting to follow the development of the organization, but also how much technology impacts all of us in an organization such as us and all the organizations that you have and then the panel leads. And so today we want to try to bring it, maybe together at the end of the day. We know this is maybe one of your last sessions, and try to make it a little bit more real and concrete. There's all this talk about digital and transformation and acceleration. And so some of the questions that we'll ask today about are going to be about exactly that. What is real? What do we see? But also, what are the real risks that we see? And what are the opportunities? So I'll maybe just name the panel briefly and then give them a chance to introduce themselves as we go through the questions. Maybe brief logistics. I'll ask usually a question to one panelist and then give them a chance to exchange on the topic, and then we'll rotate that way through the 45 minutes that we have together. So together today we have Don Sherman, CTO of Pegasystems. I have to go in order, which is not on my list, Aruna Jayanthi, Managing Director, Latin America and Canada with Capgemini, Nicole Foster, Director of Global AI and Machine Language and Canadian Public Policy with AWS, and Alex Vorkotiotis, CTO for ECAM. I will mention a Garda World company. So welcome, everybody. Good afternoon. Maybe we'll start right away, as I mentioned, and Don, ask you the first question. I mean, look, I see it, you see it, we all see it, AI. I mean, I almost feel bad to be here talking about AI, but I've actually reworked my narrative to say, like, we can't avoid it anymore. We're 2-3 years past that. So what have you seen that really is a success story you can share with us? What are people actually doing to make business better today?
All right, well, excellent. Thank you. My name is Don Sherman. I'm CTO at Pega. We are a $1.5 billion Boston-based software company. We work to drive automation and transformation for a lot of organizations, including some of the larger financial institutions and governments here in Canada. AI can be I think, very tricky topic because it splinters into so many different areas, both of technology but of business use cases. And I actually thought we heard a great example of what I think is important for leadership in the AI world, actually at lunch today. We had Jenny Johnson from Franklin Templeton was speaking. And one of the things that I've said to a lot of the organizations I work with is, unlike a lot of technology transformations that happen, this is not one that can be delegated. This isn't one that can be handed off to your CIO or your CTO to go figure out. And I thought it was really great to hear a CEO of a major financial institution talking about how she personally played with AI and used it to do some programming work, what she described as what we're starting in the industry to call vibe coding, which sounds really cool. But I think what's important about that is, I think the first thing about understanding use cases is, if you haven't played with some of this technology in some form yourself, if you don't understand both what it's capable of and also what it's not capable of, it's really hard to find those use cases in your business. The second thing I would say is, it's really important for us to understand that AI isn't this blob of things. It's not just one technology. And we've all gotten very excited about the latest generation of AI advancements, what we call large language models, or LLMs, what's happening with GPT, I think, as being the big example that we all saw. But we've been using AI in the form of machine learning and statistical models inside of our businesses for decades. If you work for an insurance company and you do underwriting, there are predictive AI models that are figuring out your underwriting. If you work for a bank and you do risk analysis, you are using AI models all over the place to figure out risk. If you work for a telecommunications company and you figure out churn models for your customers, those are AI models, right? So the other thing that's really important as we continue to push what the forefront of some of these large language models can do, let's not forget that there are very proven deployable AI models that are used pretty much across every use case I see in the business place. So when I look at the large language models that are going on out there, I'm seeing two big areas where companies are driving use cases. And the first is what I just call productivity, right? We all use WebEx or Teams or Zoom to do calls. And now I don't do a call without getting a summary from an AI model, right? And it means I skip a lot of meetings, which is good. I probably didn't need to go to those meetings to begin with, but now I skip more of them. So I think there are those productivity use cases, summarizing your emails for you, helping you write more concisely, that I think we're all going to pick up, right? And I think it's going to drive some universal gains in productivity. But I also don't think it's going to drive a competitive advantage for anybody because we're all going to get the same productivity gains. So you got to keep up, but it's not actually going to become an advantage. And then I think there are the use cases that are more transformational, which is how do I use AI to profoundly change the business? How do I use it to dramatically accelerate research if I'm in the life sciences space? How do I use it to improve the way that I do exploration or design alternative energy plants if I'm in the energy space? How do I use it if I'm a bank? And we work with a lot of our clients to redesign some of their fundamental processes and how they run. And using AI to actually be the thing that redesigns the processes, I think is pretty powerful. And I think it's that engine of transformation where I'm focused on what's the outcome for my customer, my business that I'm trying to make better, and then I work back into how I can apply AI to get there, that is actually going to drive the most value and is actually going to be the place where organizations see real change.
Maybe I can just add something to that, Don, around the use cases and the benefits. More important, I tend to look at it in terms of what is the ROI that we're getting out of these use cases. I mean, you articulated the productivity, personal productivity tools, and business use cases as well. What we found, so Capgemini is a consulting firm, both technology and business transformation. So this is my day job, like helping companies implement AI at scale. So what we found is that the benefits and the use cases, broadly, you can look at them in let's say 5 areas, okay? Number one is the personal productivity, okay? And we found that there's approximately, it's still early days, I have to say, but there's about 8 to 9%. This is across about 1,100 global companies that we did. There's this productivity gains that are there. And then you get to improvement in customer engagement. So how are you using, what are the use cases that are driving higher customer engagement and loyalty and so on, right? So there, again, you see about 6 to 7% improvement. And then you have the operational efficiency related ones, like how can you improve your supply chain, your logistics, your manufacturing process, your R&D process, and all of those things. So that's another level. But what for me, beyond these 3 is most important is how does it actually impact the company's top and bottom line? So what is driving to, I think Jenny Johnson also referred to it earlier at lunchtime, saying that what is the use case that is driving increase in sales? Okay,
more revenue, more profitability.
More revenue, more revenue.
Profitability. That's
so
it.
There are, use cases like, how are you really driving, for example, dynamic pricing models. Okay, look at the competition, quickly scan the market, present pricing models, improve price promotions, and then get more revenue.
We see a lot, for example, in real-time personalization. So using AI to figure out the instant you're talking to a customer, what's the right conversation, not the product you want to sell them, but the actual conversation that's going to be relevant to them at that moment.
Nicole, I'll give you one last comment on this question, and then we'll move on so we keep covering more ground.
Sure. I'll maybe just share two use cases that I am particularly inspired by. One is a Montreal-based company or a founded company called Brainbox AI. They basically used AI to manage commercial facilities in terms of their heat and ventilation systems in real time. So using predictive technology, kind of turning up the heat or on the air conditioning a little bit ahead of when you needed it. Just based on sort of that predictive use of the building. And that use case, for example, resulted in about a 40% energy savings for those facilities and 25% reduction in emissions. So huge cost savings for companies in using that technology. The other one, if we think about physician burnout, which is a huge problem for healthcare systems across Canada, and this is a very tangible, applicable use case, is using voice-to-text technology to capture patient visits and charting those visits immediately for those doctors. The estimates are that this saves a physician 20% of his time or her time. That is 1 day a week more of doctors that we would be seeing patients rather than doing administrivia. So I just think those are two really tangible use cases where the bottom line impact is so immediate.
Awesome, thank you. Thank you, everybody. So we'll skip, so we keep moving along. So now that we've had some use cases, and it's good to get the early, and a lot of us are probably in pilot programs and exploration phases, but Aruna, how do companies take these pilot and few people experimenting to actually scaling AI systems in production? What does it take to get to enterprise impact?
So I think a lot of companies now are already in the POC phase. So they've already tried something, whether it's personal productivity or trying to find out how can I cut something that takes 30 minutes of time to 3 minutes or less. So they're all over the place. But one thing that is needed, not one, let's say 5 things that are needed to really take this to scale. And the challenges that we see are, the most important one is around data. Okay, AI models just require data because fundamentally, what is it? You're looking at a whole lot of data, you're analyzing the patterns, and then you're making either a prediction or you're generating new content which is in line with those patterns. That's fundamentally what is happening out here. So if there's no data, if there's nothing to train that, then you're not going to get it. Or if you have inadequate data or something that only represents part of possible scenarios, you're not going to get correct outcomes. And that's the one thing that is required. And where we advise clients is first get your data foundation layer right. That's most important to scale any AI program. And we see a lot of challenges there. People don't want to share it. I came across one where there is, let's say procurement contract data. The procurement owns it, but legal wants to look at it, finance wants to look at it, everybody wants to look at it to start analyzing it. And once you tell them you've got to move this to a common data lake and we're going to run on it, there is this sense of, okay, they're operating in silos, not willing to share. So I think what needs to be done really is to set that data foundation within an organization and set up the governance in terms of how do you collect it? How do you store it? How do you retrieve it? Who's the owner of the data? Who's going to maintain it? I think these are very important things. That's I think, is the fundamental requirement. And then the next is, of course, the entire technical infrastructure, which one has to look at the ROI, because sometimes there's such a proliferation of use cases. Everybody, especially when you've trained the entire organization, everybody is excited about it. Everybody has got a use case. And then there's such a proliferation, you really got to look at, what is the cost benefit that you're getting out of it? Because at the end of the day, it costs a lot. The infrastructure costs a lot. So I'm sure you all have read statistics around, one query on, let's say, ChatGPT would probably cost 10 times as much as what you would do on a simple Google query. Yep. So there's this whole thing around, you've got to be careful about your use cases and make sure that there is a genuine ROI on the ones that you're implementing. And then next is the talent question, which I'm sure...
we'll get into that next.
Exactly. So I don't want to answer the talent question about it. And then there is the question of how do you get trust there? Okay. Again, I think there's a lot that Nicole can talk about in terms of the policies there and how to make that happen. So I won't go too much into it. But just simple things like how do you make sure that the models that you're building really represent a true world and are not there's no bias in it, and they are not giving you false results, right? So an example, if you build let's say for recruitment, right? You're building a model where you're throwing in a lot of resumes and you tell them that these are the people that I've recruited. Maybe, you could end up with, let's say, racial profiling out there. Maybe because the 3 guys or 10 guys that you recruited in the past happen to be of a certain profile. Yeah. But, it's very dangerous when you indiscriminately use it for such use cases. So you've got to set the rules right and make sure that there's no inherent bias. Same thing for creditworthiness. I came across one bank which did a POC, and one entire zip code was knocked out, okay? Because they found that there were many examples of people not creditworthy from that zip code. So they decided that just, AI engine just decided it's not going to do it. Now, that is a huge problem.
Well,
right?
and
You cannot generalize.
Well, and AI, as you said, is all based on historical data. And unfortunately, in a lot of our societies, there are historical biases that live in that data. So even if you get your data clean and you feed it into an AI model, it's going to capture those biases. And so what we've seen is working with a lot of banks and other regulated industries is you actually have to put in proactive tests against the AI for the bias. You actually have to determine the biases that you want to look for and protect against, and actually proactively, before you make the model live, test against it. Because if you just depend on your data, there's going to be biases in there, that like that zip code example you made, that you might not have even realized were there.
That's why I think it's fundamentally you need very strong governance in order to establish AI at scale.
You want to comment? Yeah.
Yeah, speaking to what you were mentioning earlier before we got into bias there, I very much agree with the idea that we need to ensure that we take all data from an organization and share it amongst all departments. But more important than just that is to itemize the actual data to which we are collecting. I find in the organizations I speak with today, there is the idea that we want to inherently utilize data from third parties that could have a benefit to us, productivity, scale, and so on. But then there's also the idea that we want to use data that we have in our own organization that's unique to our organization, itemize it so that we could use it at a later date in some intelligent manner utilizing artificial intelligence. If we, just obfuscate that information or don't collect it because we don't see a purpose for it right now, that could be something that we would regret as an organization in the future. And so I think, to what your point, collect the data and itemize that data so we know what it means and what we could use it for in the future. On the bias topic, that's a tricky one for sure. There's even the manipulation of that to try to weight scale out bias is inherently adding your own bias to that. So it's definitely something that I would leave in your hands.
I'll jump to the policy discussion a little bit later, but I did want to talk maybe touch on some of the comments around scaling and how do we make sure we're taking advantage of the technology. So I would say right now, in terms of a general trend, we're sort of seeing some very specific sectors are more taking up this technology than others. And there are some sectors where there's actually potentially huge benefit to taking up the technology that we're seeing low take up. And so if we think about that sort of policy discussion and what we're trying to accomplish in terms of an economic productivity goal, how do we start thinking about some of those sectors that are low take up? Healthcare actually is one of them. It's very low take up, but huge potential. And also, there's a lot of things there that would make you think they might be faster to take up the technology. But there are also tremendous opportunities in our manufacturing sector. Canada is way behind on applying this technology to our manufacturing sector, way behind the US. Both Canada and the UK are way behind the US. But for example, how are we thinking about it in infrastructure? How are we thinking about it in construction, agriculture? So there's a lot of less traditional sectors in terms of technology take-up. And some of these sectors, like construction and healthcare, we have significant labor shortages. So how can AI sort of also help us, not with just productivity challenges, but where we have labor shortages as well, which may be a nice segue into some of the skills discussion. But super quickly, to your point on what are the magic kind of combination of factors that you need to see take up of the technology, it is that sort of technical know-how, which is found in abundance in the companies on this stage. But in addition to that, you need data, which you mentioned, but you also need that sector expertise. So you kind of need to marry all three to sort of see those use cases have the impact that we want them to have.
Awesome. So thank you. And yes, I will move on to the skills question. And maybe I was looking for a place to place that anecdote. And if you don't mind, Alex, I'll just throw that in before I joined in. But one thing about AI, I think to also keep in mind is the generational perception. So depending of your age group, you will use and perceive AI a different way. And so I asked my son, who's 15, as I was like speaking at this conference about AI. So what do you think about AI? You're 15. Like, are you afraid, like, for your job? He said, well, no, Dad, like my job doesn't even exist yet. So I'm going to grow up in a world where AI is going to be, but he didn't say ubiquitous, but I think he meant ubiquitous. And that's just going to be part of the world I'm going to grow up in. Anyway, so I thought that was a sort of clever and optimistic view, and I'd like to be optimistic about it. So Alex, in your experience, then you've seen, so the impact it has on people, on skills, on reskilling, on upskilling. So what's the best approach to combine, I guess, the technology and the human factor to have success when you talk about AI?
Oh, gee, that's quite complicated for sure. We typically what we would do is look at the three primary constraints that we have to like the upskilling and reskilling and so on in the industry. So the first constraint would be the trust factor, right? So we want to ensure that the individuals, employees that are in this case non-technical, that we build trust with them that artificial intelligence is something that has value, has lasting power, is here to stay. Right? In a world where technology changes as rapidly as it does, things like NFTs and so on have maybe soured people's perception on what some things that would have long-term value would be. So the first is overcome that trust. The next part that comes into play there is intimidation. We have the actual idea of how much does someone want to adopt a new technology, or how willing or capable do they think they are to do such a thing. And so for this case, the example I try to use to individuals is that if I say to you that you have to build a car, that's going to seem like a very intimidating factor, right? But driving a car is quite simple. And with artificial intelligence, we don't need the general populace to be able to build artificial intelligence. That's exclusive to a few technologists. It's about utilization, which is quite a bit easier. And leadership, C-suite, or just senior leaders within an organization, through their own convictions, can really convey the message to individuals that this is not something to be intimidated by. It's quite easy to implement in your day-to-day work and kind of overcome it that way. The last one would be fluency. And fluency, that comes in two primary flavors. So the first is, how do I talk about artificial intelligence? That's something that obviously, us four panelists and the majority of the people that are here in this room today have a high fluency to talk about artificial intelligence. We know terms like machine learning, neural nets, and computer vision. But the second portion is, how do I talk to AI? And that's a completely different premise, right? And so that is going to be very distinct to the type of artificial intelligence that I'm utilizing, whether it's prompt management through LLM models, or whether it's right down to certain computer languages for things like computer vision. That's where we have to start teaching people, this is where the steering wheel is, here's how to use the gas pedal, the brake pedal, and so on. So that the intimidation's not there. It's quite easy to do as long as you know or have someone to show you what to do.
And can I throw another word out there that I actually think is pretty important right now, given, I think, the impact of this disruption, and that's empathy, right? And I think there needs to be, from a leadership perspective, empathy both to our users, right, as all of us go through this sort of time of figuring out what this does. There's like a little bit of fear, right, among some people of like, well, what is this going to do to my job? What is my job going to look like? And empathy towards our customers, right? We can use AI models to turn ourselves into complete and total profit engines and basically take the TikTok approach of, I'm just going to get you to click and click and click and click. And we know the models can optimize for that. But we, for example, work with a very large bank in Australia. And what they've done is use AI models, yes, to sell new products, but they equally use it to educate their customers on government benefits the customers may be eligible for but don't take advantage of, to find ways to actually help better their customers' lives and use the AI to become a trusted and build that trust relationship for the customer. And by using AI to demonstrate that empathy, and by the way, the AI models themselves don't have empathy. The people deploying the AI models have empathy, right? By using AI to demonstrate that empathy, they're actually deepening their relationship. So when the opportunity to make a sale comes, the customer is bought into the brand and bought into the relationship. And I think bringing empathy into that conversation, both internally and also through the outcomes we use these models to drive, is really going to be important.
Comments? mean, we have a little bit of time if you want to comment on the skills part.
Go ahead. On the skills.
Microphone, please. Yeah. The microphone.
On the skills part, I think there is some trepidation around it, but I would say that, we have to look at the positive side and explain to people what the positive benefits are. I mean, she talked about, let's say, medical care, where there is shortage of staff. I mean, that's an area which would really, benefit from it. You look at cybersecurity and fraud. I mean, that's immense. I mean, there is. I wouldn't say there's no way humans can catch up with it, but I think there is an immense potential in using this. So I think, first of all, from a skills perspective, there is a sense of fear around what's going to happen to jobs. But I think if you look at the positive side of it, there's so much more that can be done. And also the way I see it, it's like my co-worker. You can treat AI as my co-worker, which really can be a symbiotic relationship where it's helping us do better, right? So if I can, I hate doing these PowerPoint slides, but if I could really get AI to help me, take my thoughts, give it my thoughts, and then it creates this dazzling, nice slide, I would be so delighted.
I'm getting some reactions here about AI as my coworker. Yeah, you want to jump in, Alex?
So the story I had was I have a woman who works for me who's a copywriter, and we can have a longer discussion about why does the CTO have a copywriter working for him. But when AI first showed up, that was a job that felt pretty threatened, right? All of a sudden, this GPT can write copy for me. What am I going to do as a copywriter? And initially, she was kind of resistant. And then what she came to realize is this allows her to totally change the scope of what she does and go from being a person who writes occasional pieces of copy to being somebody who uses AI to scale her skill and influence across the entire business and build models that allow every single thing that's written by anyone in the company to take her best thinking and inject it into it. And all of a sudden, she went from being the copywriter for this small little chunk of the business to being someone who influences every single piece of text the company puts out in the world, and realized that AI was the model that allowed her to expand her influence and change her. And that to me felt like a really healthy way of looking at sort of the transformation is, how can this help me scale what I do? How can this help me make my skills more impactful to my organization?
Yeah, what I would want to add to the training upskilling is in that example you just gave, it's perfect, right? When we have a task that has to be conducted by key presses, and then we use artificial intelligence to kind of proliferate that, make it so that individual becomes more prolific with the amount of content they can create. But on the flip side, there's also the other portion we have to think about the ethical complication or implications where AI is making rapid decision-making processes based on what it interprets someone's decision-making path to be. And so something that I want to include in the business practices that I have at ECAM, and I'm sure GARD as well, and many others, is to ensure that through the process of training, not just the utilization of artificial intelligence, but the ethical implications it has to utilize it and to use it at a prolific level.
You guys are really good in setting up the next questions every time, so making my job easy. So our next topic, as we keep moving through the question, is the trust piece, is the policy and the governance piece. As this especially gets embedded in some of the processes and information. I know there was a session earlier today about information as well. How do we prepare for this? How do we set up the guidelines and the governance to be ready for AI to thrive with some amount of guardrails to limit where it can go?
Yeah, so the right guardrails are super important, but getting that right is, I think, the big challenge that we have. And we're starting to sort of see some bills now have passed, and we're starting to sort of have a little bit more experience with that, what the compliance implications of this legislation is going to be. So obviously the big one's the EU AI Act, but we're seeing bills pass at the state level in a number of states in the US. Japan has passed some legislation, and Korea as well. And so I think, yes, we want the right guardrails, but the path to that may not always be legislative. So another pathway to think about guardrails is, first of all, there's a ton of, I think, the industry has done a lot of sort of thought leadership around, the tenets of responsible AI and doing the kind of level of testing and research to try to kind of advance the sector in order to enhance that trust. So the industry is doing a lot and is extremely thoughtful about this, both from like out of commercial necessity, but also out of just being, how are you responsive to what your customers are asking for as well? So international standards, whether it's an ISO standard or another standard, are another hugely important tool in finding flexible frameworks that companies or organizations can use in order to ensure that they are identifying the right guardrails. So there's an opportunity to be implementing those standards in the absence of legislation. And so, some companies are doing that. The standards are new, they're still emerging, and so we still need, I think, a stronger ecosystem around standards adoption, but it is a really flexible and voluntary pathway to regulation. The other thing, when we're thinking about productivity as being a major challenge and competitiveness, is being aware of the cost of compliance. So the EU AI Act, there is now, I would say, a significant amount of concern and potentially some buyer's remorse about the cost of compliance of this legislation. Some estimates are that for every dollar spent on AI, 40 cents of that is going to compliance. So are you even realizing the gains of adopting this technology when you're spending 40% of your bill just on compliance? And so it's also an extremely, extremely difficult technology to regulate because it is, as you've pointed out earlier, it is so many things in so many different sectors that trying to design a piece of legislation that can address and mitigate all of those risks is extremely challenging. And that's not to say you don't regulate aspects of this technology, but we maybe need to be more prioritized about how we do it. And for example, taking advantage of already regulated industries where there's well-established regulators that understand how to mitigate risk in that sector can also maybe expand their scope to look, and a lot of them are, I'm not saying something that isn't already happening, a lot of them are already doing that. So, we work very closely with healthcare regulators, financial services regulators, to help them understand how to mitigate the risks that are particular to their sector with this technology. So I just say it's a huge challenge and it's not without cost, but there's still a lot that we can do without passing legislation or regulation. And by the way, a lot of what AI is doing is regulated because a lot of law doesn't sort of differentiate between a human doing something or a machine doing something. It's still a regulated activity.
And I think also like a part of responsible use, and Aruna made a great point about this, is aligning the AI and, without getting too technical, the type of model you're using against the value. Like there's stuff that a large language model can do that other software we have today can do. It's just the large language model costs 10% more and has 100 times the energy consumption. So, and that 10 times cost, 100 times energy consumption might sometimes have business value, and sometimes it might just be a waste and a lazy way of solving a problem we already know how to solve.
And the customer pays for the energy consumption. So,
yeah.
So there, even if you perhaps were less motivated by the environmental cost, most businesses are very motivated by the cash cost of that. So
Someone's going to pay for it at some point.
Yes,
Right?
there's a built-in incentive.
Yeah. But unfortunately, we're finding that many people are really not looking at they're looking at the benefits they get, but they're ignoring the sustainability impact of this. I think there is
and there's a little bit of a danger of running around with what I call sort of the large language model hammer and whacking at everything, when sometimes you don't need a hammer, you need a screwdriver, you need a pair of scissors that are far more effective and far cheaper. And again, without, again, getting too deep into the tech, you do actually have to bring the level of understanding so that you're applying the right AI model to the right solution and not injecting a bunch of cost and a bunch of risk when there are other ways to address that problem. And I think that's an equal part of sort of this responsibility that we have.
There's also another way to think about sustainability. I'm going to go back to your car analogy, which I really liked, and I'm going to steal. But if you think about training AI as the bus, I mean, that's the bus that everybody's riding, where we don't need everybody building a bus. We need some people to just ride the bus. And so when you think about your application of technologies, there is actually an economic efficiency in us all benefiting from the cost of training those models and then leveraging them. So there is some some kind of like efficiency in the fact that we're not all building a bus, we're not all trading an AI system. Some of us are just applying a system that has already been built.
You like that?
Whatever I had is gone at the idea that you would use that in that manner. I think that's fantastic. I know what I was going to say is just, I agree wholeheartedly on the idea that we want to target what's currently available and try to use those kinds of things. But on the same token, it is somewhat beneficial that there is this adoption rate where more people are getting involved and utilizing AI or creating AI. And so when we're trying to kind of balance both out, yes, we want to utilize what's already existing because the power implications and environmental impact obviously are significant. But on the same token, we are getting buy-in, which is one of the main constraints to overcome in this whole process, is getting buy-in from the general public to participate.
I would also say, as a cloud service company, to your point, like we do see early stage, kind of the hockey stick of kind of the customer spend very high at the early stage of their application. But once they've made that investment, the focus starts to go to optimization, and you definitely see a flattening and sometimes a lowering of cost, because as you build it, you just sort of want to kind of get the thing built. But then once you have, there's a huge focus on optimizing those costs.
I mean, eventually it will, because whether it's the results should speak for themselves, right? There will be a reduction in operating costs, maybe not just the AI cost, but you have to look at the business cost of operating it, yeah. And then you will see big time savings.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right, so time flies. We have probably time for one last round. And so, as we wrap up today and wrap up this session, maybe we'll go around this time, we'll go a little bit more, make sure that everybody gets their voice in. But as everybody goes home and goes back to their business in the next few days, what would you say they have to watch for? Like, it's moving so fast right now. We got news releases, we got new models, we got all kinds of announcements. In the next few months, what do you think we should expect? And what do you think we should do in our businesses to make the most of AI going back to the office tomorrow? Now, this wasn't exactly prepared this way, so I'll give you a second to think about it.
So if I'm going to go first, sure. That's difficult. In the next few months, what would I leave people with? It would be the idea that you would want to educate yourself continually on these kinds of conferences and other thought leaders and specialists in the industry that are talking about exactly what's coming down the pipeline, how we could use it, what exists. Do spend a good deal of time looking at the security implications and the ethics portion of it. I do believe, as I mentioned to you, very deeply, although I work with computer vision and I deal with the technology side quite often, on a personal level, I do care a lot about the ethical implications of artificial intelligence, and mainly what impact it has on trust, on the general public's trust of information. There was a show earlier, a panel earlier that was speaking just to that, to protecting ourselves against disinformation, and I thought it was incredible. And I really enjoyed seeing that there are individuals that are spending so much of their own effort to learn about those kinds of impacts on society. So over the next few months, I would say, look to IFA and other leaders in this space to learn what you can, and yeah.
Thank you.
So because I'm in a policy-oriented role, my office is maybe not the typical office, but what I'm looking at and seeing is where I think the government is going to be making significant investments over the course of the next year. I haven't seen the detailed announcement. The Prime Minister certainly announced significant investments in national defense today, and plans to do more. And I think the other thing that we're sort of seeing as a signal is stronger investments in economic enabling infrastructure and trade enabling infrastructure. And so I'm thinking about, how do we ensure those sectors are also adopting, while there's this massive amount of investment going on, do we also have the right strategies to address AI adoption in those sectors? And how do we kind of line that effort up so that, yes, our national defense strategy is going to be well supported by technology, as well as, as we're, as a country, making these large investments, how do we maximize those investments?
I'd say this is not a hype, so don't imagine it'll go away. I think AI is here to stay, and it will profoundly impact the way we work, the way we interact with each other, and the way that we do our business. And I think it's up to us to really look for what is the best that we can get out of it and build a model in both in the way that we do our, even in our personal, the way that we use it for personal use, like how we interact with the bank, how we interact with, the internet or anything else, and then also how businesses perform. So I think we have to find the best way and build trust with the system and look at how we can really benefit from this phenomenal technology.
So everybody just said about trust and scale and understanding value, but I'd also argue, go play. Like, this is a technology revolution that all of us have on our phones, that we can all literally go to GPT, to Google. Heck, we got a free tool called Blueprint that I'll tell you about that you can use, right? Go play. The technology is moving so fast that yesterday's expert, if he or she is not playing, is going to be behind the times. So I don't think anybody actually has the answers. So we all need to kind of participate to figure it out. And the only way you're going to really understand what this stuff can and cannot do is if you use it, if you experiment with it, you play it. Think about, how does this change my job? How does this change how I put together a meal plan for my kids this week, right? So I'd encourage all of us to use the technology and to think pretty broadly and big about some of the things it can transform in our business, in our societies, in our lives, so that we all are participants in what, as Aruna said, is going to be a pretty massive transformation.
So just to wrap up, maybe I figured, I don't know if we'll get much debate or controversy, but I find, as a CIO, I see some successes in some areas. It's a vast combination of people and technology, but some others are struggling. But one question I'll ask, and maybe we do a bit of a more rapid fire, but you go back to the office tomorrow, and I have this AI. Do you start with AI first? You set up like an AI guideline, like a committee, like an AI expert, which I will provide maybe my own perspective. Sometimes it's starting with the solution, not the problem. Or do you start with, like a few of you talked about productivity, you start with a problem, and then you figure out sometimes it's ML, sometimes it's something else, sometimes it's a different technology, sometimes it is AI. So which way do you start first? Do you start with AI, or do you start with the business problem?
So I'm gonna hedge, but I actually think you need to have a little bit of both. Oh. You need to play enough with the AI that you understand what it can and cannot do. But that alone doesn't solve anything. You also have to have an understanding of your business domain. What are you trying to make better? Are you trying to make a process more efficient? Are you trying to make a customer experience better? Are you trying to find profitability or revenue that you may be missing, right? And it's only if you can bring together the understanding of what the technology can do and the needs, challenges, and opportunities in your business that you're going to discover sort of where the disruptive solution is, where the disruptive opportunity is.
Just to add to that, I think what you're sort of alluding to, but not stating outright, so hopefully I'm not misinterpreting you, but the importance of multidisciplinary teams in innovation. Oh, yeah, so it's not enough to have the technologists. You really need people that understand your business, understand the data, and that you are collaborating to figure out like what problem it is you're trying to solve. So like Amazon has a typical, like we call it a working backwards process. The first thing you do in that process is figure out who the customer is. And that it might not actually be the most obvious place for who you're trying to solve for, but you really do need that kind of multidisciplinary process to get to the best solutions.
Agreed. You need a top-down view. And top-down view starting with the standard people, process, tools, infrastructure, governance to drive a really robust AI program in the company. And then I would say you need to let bottom-up innovation, entrepreneurship go for it.
Well, a lot of it's change management, right?
Exactly.
So
sponsorship spines, yep.
Yeah.
I think you nailed it in the very beginning. If you don't have a committee, start one right away, get business leaders from each of the departments in the organization, and start talking through how AI can help your business. Maybe it's on productivity, right, which was a huge category where it has huge implications, or maybe it's product defining and fundamentally changes everything there is to do with your business. But it starts with talking not just with technologists, by no means with just technologists, right? Have them in the room, but they should be doing a lot more listening than speaking when it comes to how artificial intelligence could have an impact on the business.
Well, thank you. I think this is going to wrap up our session this afternoon. Thank you, Don, Aruna, Nicole, and Alex. It was a pleasure. Hopefully everybody got something out of it. My last, perhaps, final thought is, to me, when I think about this, it's really a story about change. And it's changing even faster than it used to. And so every time we think we got something figured out, something else happens. So if there's a message here is, everybody I think has the same, what you've heard from our panelists is embrace it, play with it, make sure you have the security right. But we're past the point of this being a curiosity and something that's going to go away, as our panelists have said. So I encourage all of you to jump in, come and see us if you have questions. And this will be, a fantastic topic over the next few years. Thank you for your time.